The Battle of Rafah is finally beginning on Yom HaShoah, the annual day of Holocaust remembrance. I'll have some thoughts about the battle and Holocaust remembrance, and also some thoughts about what it means to be Israeli as we look towards next week's celebration of Israel Independence Day, coming up on In Focus. Well, after about 3 months of waiting, the IDF has finally gotten the green light, apparently, to go forward and take out Hamas's final enclave in the southernmost town of Rafah, right on the tip of the border with Egypt. As you guys all know, we've been talking about this for months. The buildup, was Israel going to dare to go in? Were we not going to dare to go in? Every single major force in the international community, from the U.S. government to the UN to the EU to Princess Rania of Jordan, and of course the International Media Corps, have all lined up in opposition to Israel taking out Hamas's final battalions in Rafah and seizing control of the international border with Egypt. Both actions that are required, that are vital, that Israel cannot win the war without carrying out in, again, the final outpost of Hamas and its conventional forces, the city of Rafah. It's also where Hamas's terror masters are thought to be located, as well as many of our hostages, dead and alive. And so it looks like it's finally beginning. And I have to tell you, we have a child that's going in there now, and so a lot of sleepless nights at our house. And I woke up this morning at around 4 o'clock in the morning with a start, and I'm thinking to myself, how are we going to be able to do this? How do we do this? I mean, after all, the international community is dead set against us doing it. The United States has apparently put an embargo on weapons to Israel. A little bit more on that coming up ahead of the Battle of Rafah. What are we going to do in order for ground forces in Rafah to be able to operate securely? They have to be operating under artillery barrages, artillery cover. And how do you do artillery cover in a city that is teeming with civilians? Up to 1.4 million civilians now, or were reportedly located in Rafah in recent months. How can we do this? How can the lives of our soldiers be secured in this battle? And how do we deal with the international repercussions where they're accusing us of war crimes when we haven't done anything that's in any way criminal at this war? How does this work? And so I'm thinking about it 4:30 in the morning, 5:30 in the morning, wondering what to think about it. And so I started talking when it was early enough, or when it was late enough to not be awkward, with a friend of mine who's a retired general, about what was happening. He said, well, Caroline, Israel, 200,000 civilians in Rafah already left, evacuated outside of the city to the tent city that Israel built by the American Pier or whatever, in what's called the Mawasi along the seacoast. So they're there, and that's their safe zone. And there are people who are leaving now, and the area that the IDF is going to be operating in is going to be evacuated. And so, and he was explaining to me how this really works. And I said, okay, and started, coming to ground or whatever. But there's a lot of apprehension among families, among the men themselves, and among the commanders, because we're going into this battle, this decisive battle that's going to determine the course of the war, whether we're going to be facing the Northern Front from a position of victory or from a position of humiliation at the hands of the U.S. and the Biden administration's political war campaign that they're carrying out against us with greater and greater hostility and spite in recent weeks as the weeks have passed. And so here we are, we're in this situation, and how is it going to work? So, what is it that we've seen in the lead up to it? So first of all, on Shabbat over the weekend, we found out, we had these reports that the United States, that the Biden administration actually told Hamas in the hostage negotiations that they will be the guarantor that Israel will not reinstate combat operations in Gaza after the hostages are released. Now, Israel never agreed to this, right? And so what the Americans were effectively saying, or absolutely saying, what the CIA director, William Burns, just told Hamas was that the United States, under the Biden administration, will act as Hamas's guarantors, that they will guarantee Hamas's victory in this war, its survival, its ability to reconstitute its regime over all of Gaza in exchange for the hostages, or some of the hostages, very few of the hostages. There are 133 Israelis alive and dead that are still in Gaza under the control of Hamas. And what the deal was calling for at certain phases was 33 and then 20, first it was 40, then 33, and then maybe 20 live hostages coming out of Gaza. To that end, Hamas put forward two videos of American citizens that have been held hostage by Hamas in Gaza since October 7th. And they were alive in the videos. Who knows when the videos were taken. At any rate, so Hamas has been carrying out this political warfare campaign, but so has the administration. And so the administration here is colluding with Hamas directly. William Burns, the CIA director, is telling Hamas, is promising Hamas that the United States will guarantee that Israel will not renew its combat operations in Gaza, and that Israeli forces are going to completely withdraw from Gaza in the course of this long ceasefire as the hostages, alive and dead, are supposedly let out. And so what happened was during, at some point in Shabbat, a senior diplomatic official, Israeli, issued a statement saying Israel never agreed to this. Israel is going to be going into Rafah, with or without a hostage deal with Hamas. And so what that senior diplomatic official, who one of the anti-Netanyahu, one of almost all of the reporters are, but this one in particular, Yaron Avraham from Channel 12, said, I'm not playing this game. The senior diplomatic official was Netanyahu. And so Netanyahu on Shabbat, he said that Israel is not going to accept any deal that in any way or prevents us from going into Rafah and destroying Hamas's battalions that are left in the city. So then Hamas said, what? We demand additional guarantees, which of course the United States wasn't able to give because Netanyahu just said that the United States has not been granted the power by Israel to make these kinds of commitments in Israel's name. So the United States was left flat-footed. They had been making claims. They had been thinking that they were going to be able to extort from Israel a permanent ceasefire without victory from Hamas, and Netanyahu said no dice. So then, the hostage talks basically went nowhere. The left, of course, blamed Israel, blamed Netanyahu, and because how could he dare say that he wouldn't renew the war and that he agreed to lose the war in order to get whatever Hamas may be willing to give. And that we're an American protectorate, and the United States gets to say when we're allowed to exercise our right to self-defense against a genocidal enemy that invaded us on October 7th. So that's what happened over the weekend. And also then, Barak Ravid, the State Department's in-house Israeli reporter who gets to report all of the nasty things that they want to do to Israel, he reported yesterday on Sunday that the Biden administration has put a hold on weapons transfers to Israel. If you recall, Congress, the Senate, passed legislation that provided $95 billion in military assistance to U.S. allies, including Ukraine and Taiwan, and Israel got $14 billion or so. Weapons, most of it is going towards Iron Dome defensive missiles and everything like that. So according to the Barak Ravid report, said that the United States had placed a hold on weapons transfers to Israel. And then my sister, who you probably remember when she was here on the show several weeks ago, Bonnie Glick, who's a former deputy administrator of USAID under Donald Trump, she wrote that actually an action like that of placing a hold on weapons that have already been duly legislated for Israel by Congress and signed into law by the president is illegal. It's under the federal law called the Impoundment Act. And actually, we should recall that Donald Trump was impeached for purportedly blocking the transfer of weapons to Ukraine back in 18? So, here you have a president, just the most recent one, was impeached for denying weapons that had already been approved for transfer in Congress. And here is Biden doing it to Israel. So that was the report, and that's the law that he is breaking. And of course, nobody's going to impeach him for that. AOC was applauding him for it. So the United States is both acting openly as Hamas's guarantor and placing weapons embargoes on Israel ahead of this decisive battle in the war. Gee, I wonder what they're trying to tell us. Anyway, so what they're trying to tell us, of course, is that the United States doesn't want Israel to win the war, and that they're willing to go to war against us in order to block it. So, this is a pretty astounding thing. Here we are. We're sending our very, very, very best men into Rafah to carry out this very difficult mission. We have to evacuate an enormous number of civilians out of Rafah. And of course, under normal circumstances, this wouldn't be a hard mission, because in order to, Rafah is not like this powerful stronghold, but the most obvious means of carrying out the occupation of the city are blocked to Israel by the United States. The first most obvious thing is, since they're right at the border with Egypt, is to let the civilians leave for Egypt, right? And go and seek refuge in third countries like Turkey, like Chechnya, like Egypt, like Qatar, all of the state sponsors of Hamas. Let them live there. Why do they have to be in a war zone? Why, again, I've said this like 150 million times on the show, I know, but why is it that the United States demanded that all of these countries take refugees from Ukraine, including Israel, by the way, and it won't allow any Gazans to leave Gaza for refuge in third countries? Why is it that they insist that Israel take care of all of these people? Whatever, because, Jewish. And so the most obvious thing to do, evacuate the civilian population, that's blocked. And the other most obvious thing to do, not only for Rafah, this would have been the case in all of Gaza after October 7th, but certainly for Rafah now, is lay siege on the city. Lay siege on the city, put together, we already did humanitarian corridors to let people leave after they've been inspected for weapons and everything like that. And if they're wanted Hamas terrorists, if they're holding hostages or whatever, let them go through inspections, leave the city, and lay siege to the terrorists inside of it. That, too, the United States, every time we tried to do it in the past, the United States screamed humanitarian crisis. They're accusing Israel of deliberately starving people, which is all a lie. They built this pier for Gaza. Why did they do this? In order to undermine Israel's war effort. Because if there's a pier there, what's it there for? It's not for humanitarian assistance. Gaza, as we've spoken about, again, ad nauseum on this show, they have more than enough food. That's why the MREs that the United States is airlifting into Gaza are being sold in open markets for pennies, because nobody needs it, because there's no shortage of food in Gaza. But they say there's a humanitarian crisis and we have to build this pier, which, by the way, is blown up twice by Hamas. They've been attacked twice. They've been bombed twice by Hamas. And the United States doesn't care. They've already sunk $350 million of taxpayer money into this sinkhole, into this pier. And then lo and behold, yesterday we've had this weird unseasonal storms happening today. And because of the inclement weather, the pier just sort of started floating into sea yesterday. So it got detached from its mooring along the coast, and it just started, moving off, floating off into the sea. And then Israel spent, they talk about all the money that the United States has given us, but, just for the people who have been harmed since October 7th in Israel, we've spent over 100 billion shekels on damages to victims, to people who have died, to their families, to the soldiers who have been harmed, to people who were injured on October 7th. That's the same amount of money that the United States is sending, or more, actually. It's more like $30 billion that Israel has, or $33 billion that Israel has had to pay so far. And that's just now, since October 7th, for victims of the Hamas invasion. So all of the same, the United States has this pier. Why is it there? It's in order to block Israel from maintaining security control over Gaza after the war is over. It's in order to force Israel to accept foreign troops in Gaza, foreign presence in Gaza that Israel can't control in Gaza. It's all in order to strategically undermine Israel's ability to achieve its war goals and to allow Hamas to reconstitute its power in Gaza after the war. So that's what the United States' game is, right? And it's playing out on the backs of our soldiers in Rafah and in other places. So that's what's happening in Israel today. And finally, yesterday on Sunday, we had 3 soldiers killed and another 9 or so wounded, some of them critically, when they were attacked by anti-tank assault on their position by Kerem Shalom crossing. And why are they there? They're there because the United States demands that we have these humanitarian aid convoys going in around the clock. And so like my friend Noah Pollack, he tweeted last night, I think it was, that the United States is responsible for their death. I wouldn't completely say that that's the case, because they were protecting the soldiers who were poised to go into Rafah. So they were checking on their munitions, on their APCs, et cetera, et cetera. So they were there for other reasons. But Kerem Shalom, that's one of the crossing areas that the United States has required Israel to open in order to resupply Hamas's civilian population. And of course, Hamas has been taking over all the aid convoys, as finally the United States acknowledged it had done from the Erez crossing point this week. For the first time, I think they ever admitted it. At any rate, so, we would have done this, but no, we can't do a siege, and we can't do evacuation of the civilian population into Egypt, because America says no. So we're stuck with these civilians. We have to resettle them somewhere else, which we're doing. We sent up these tents, the tents in the Mawasi along the coast for them to live in, and they can be there in the shade of the Americans and, enjoy their protection or whatever from the terrible Israelis and sit out the battle there. And then we're sending in our forces to pacify this city, which is, again, the final outpost of Hamas's conventional forces that have to be destroyed in order for Israel to be able to end the sort of high-intensity stage of this war and go into the kind of counter-terror battles that the United States, supposedly prefers. So that if we had done this 3 months ago, it would have been finished 3 months ago. But the United States has been blocking it because they don't want it to be done at all. They don't want it to be done at all because they don't want Israel to win. Why? Because reasons. And then there's a big question in Israel. So what happens if the United States escalates still further its political battle against Israel? Well, first of all, we have to assume that the Biden administration will, in fact, continue to escalate, because that's all it's been doing since October 7th. It just keeps constantly raising the flames of its assault on Israel. Well, what will happen? They say, well, what will happen if the United States allows a Security Council resolution condemning Israel or demanding a ceasefire and putting it under a binding UN ceasefire resolution under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter? It says Israel has to commit to a ceasefire, otherwise we become an international pariah. Well, first of all, we already are, thanks to the Biden administration, an international pariah, right? Because the Biden administration is propagating these slanders, these blood libels against us, claiming that we're starving people and that there's a humanitarian crisis in Gaza, when we're neither starving people nor is there a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. So they are escalating. They always escalate. The ICC, as senior officials at The Hague told Amit Segal that he would never go forward with this plan to issue arrest warrants for starvation against Prime Minister Netanyahu, Defense Minister Gallant, and IDF Chief of General Staff Herzi Halevi if they hadn't been, quote, green-lighted by the Biden administration. So that's also allegedly an American operation at The Hague. And the question is, what happens if the United States abstains from, fails to veto, supports a UN Security Council resolution requiring Israel to stand down? And so I was just interviewed about this on the radio, and I said, the thing is that it's a terrible concept. It's a terrible prospect that we may very well be facing. I think we're certainly facing it from the administration, and probably before the election, because they think this will help them get votes. Like Barack Obama waited to enable the anti-Israel resolution 2234 to pass after the 2016 elections. It went through in December because he was afraid of a backlash from voters if he did this. But Biden actually is seeking out the Hamas supporters as his voters. As you saw in my interview with Richard Baer, he thinks that this will get them it'll get him the youth vote in the United States, that American youth are so anti-Semitic that they're going to vote for him because he's anti-Israel. So that's the thinking, apparently, such as thinking goes in this administration. And so they're likely to do it before the election, not after the election. So I said, this is a terrible thing, an absolutely terrible thing, except when you consider what the alternative is. The alternative is that we lose the war. If the cost of winning the war is further international isolation, including an American passage at the UN Security Council of a resolution condemning Israel or demanding a ceasefire or whatever in the war in the middle of a battle, that's a terrible thing that can happen. But a worse thing that could happen from Israel's perspective is that we could actually lose. And so, that's really where we are today, and we have to recognize it for what it is. This is the threat. It's losing the war versus being isolated by the United States, and I think it's very obvious what it is that we have to do. And then that brings me to Yom HaShoah. So Yom HaShoah, it's been 80 years since the Holocaust. And, the question is, how are we supposed to be looking anyway at the Holocaust today, 80 years later, when we saw what happened on October 7th? And I thought that Prime Minister Netanyahu, he gave a stunning speech at Yad Vashem yesterday, and I did a translation of an excerpt of that speech that I want to play for you, where Prime Minister Netanyahu talks about, the way that we're being slandered and why it is that these slanders are believed. And I want you to just watch for a second this clip of the speech that he gave last night.
אנו נאבקים בחזית כפולה. ראשית, במשטר הקנאי באיראן ובשלוחות הטרור שלו שחותרים בגלוי להשמידנו. שנית, בהתפרצות הר הגעש האנטישמי שיורק לבה רותחת של שקרים נגדנו ברחבי העולם. צריך לומר בפשטות, האנטישמיות שהייתה חבויה במדינות המערב מאז השואה חוזרת במלוא כיעורה. כמו בימים עברו, האשמות השקריות אינן מופנות כלפינו בגלל דברים שאנחנו עושים, אלא בגלל עצם העובדה שאנחנו קיימים. אבל לצערי, רבים בעולם מאמינים לשקרים הללו, והם מאמינים להם רק בגלל סיבה אחת, כי אנחנו יהודים. איזו פשיטת רגל מוסרית. השקר הפך לאמת, האמת הפכה לשקר, ועל כך כבר אמר הנביא ישעיהו, הוי האומרים לרע טוב ולטוב רע.
So what does he say here? Yes, in fact, it is moral bankruptcy, right? In a different section of the speech, Netanyahu talks about the fact that the difference between today and 80 years ago is that 80 years ago we were completely helpless, and the nations of the world went forward and allowed this to happen. Actually, this is the part that he gave in English. I just want you to look at that one as well.
80 years ago, in the Holocaust, the Jewish people were totally defenseless against those who sought our destruction. No nation came to our aid. Today, we again confront enemies bent on our destruction. I say to the leaders of the world, no amount of pressure, no decision by any international forum will stop Israel from defending itself. As the Prime Minister of Israel, the one and only Jewish state, I pledge here today from Jerusalem on this Holocaust Remembrance Day, if Israel is forced to stand alone, Israel will stand alone. But we know we're not alone, because countless decent people around the world support our just cause.
You know, Saul Bellow, he had a lot of great lines, and I'm going to butcher one that he had in what I consider to really be his best novel, or at least the novel that of Saul Bellow that I liked the most, which was Ravelstein, which is his last novel. And he talked there, it was an Alan Bloom character. They were close friends, and in the novel, Ravelstein, who was the Alan Bloom character, he talks about the Holocaust, and the basic insight that he gave there was that, it was during the years of the Holocaust, all of the nations essentially were agreed that the German idea of annihilating the Jewish people was a good thing, that they were fine with that they got what the Germans were up to, and they thought that was just cool, that was fine, and they weren't going to get involved, whether it was Roosevelt or any of the international leaders. Obviously, Churchill, Prime Minister Netanyahu, claims that he tried to intervene, but the British military wouldn't let him. That's probably true. But, Roosevelt absolutely prohibited the U.S. Army from taking any action to save the Jews. And, of course, he blocked the Jews of Europe from seeking refuge in the United States ahead of or during the Holocaust. So, and it's similar today. And so if we look at what Netanyahu said about the fact that 80 years ago there was not one nation on earth that was willing to stand up for the Jews who were completely defenseless, we can look at it today and say there's no nation on earth, not nation in the sense of people, but nation in the sense of national government today on planet Earth that is willing to stand with Israel, that is willing to, say that good is good and evil is evil, and not the opposite. Evil is not good. Evil is evil. Hamas is evil. Israel is good, and you stand with the good. You don't stand with rapists. You don't stand with child killers. You don't stand with murderers. You don't stand with people who incinerate entire families in their homes. You don't stand with people who call for the annihilation of all the Jewish people, and they take every action they possibly can to advance that goal. You don't stand with the Iranian regime against the Iranian people. You don't stand with the Iranian regime and its terror proxies in Lebanon, in Iraq, in Iran, in Syria, in Gaza, in Judea and Samaria, in Yemen. You don't stand with them. You stand with the people that they stand against, because in the case of Israel, and even the Sunni Arab states, you'd be standing with the good guys. You stand with the good guys against the evil guys. But, as Netanyahu said, they believe these lies, these nations of the world, the governments of the world, because they want to. And why do they want to? Because we're Jewish. Because anti-Semitism that was kept in abeyance for 80 years in the West is back. It's roared back to life. And it is the life force behind almost everything that we're seeing in relation to Israel and the Palestinians today. It's an incredibly horrible situation, but it is the situation. And so just as 80 years ago, all the nations of the world were pretty much agreed that Hitler had a good idea there to kill all of the Jews. So today you have a basic unanimity of opinion led by the United States with all the nations on earth behind it, saying, yeah, it's fine. Let's protect Hamas. Let's empower Iran. Let's make Iran the regional hegemon so that we can reach a balance of power. Let's weaken Israel. Let's weaken the UAE. Let's weaken Saudi Arabia. Let's not allow them to retaliate against Iran for attacks on their territory. Let's only allow them to take defensive actions to intercept Iranian missiles en route to their lands. Let's not allow them to take any offensive action against Iran's missile sites, against its nuclear sites, against its drone training and development sites. Let's not let it take any take any effective action against its oil pipelines, its oil installations, its gas pipelines, its gas installations. Let's not allow it anybody to take any action against Iran. Let's empower Iran still further and all of its proxies. Let's ensure their survival, and let's ensure that they really have no major price to pay for their massive aggression against Israel or any other regional actor. That is the policy that is being followed by the Biden administration today. And, the difference between 80 years ago today with the Holocaust is not so much the nations of the world, it's the Jews. And that brings me to the last thing that I want to talk about. You know, we're living through some difficult times here in Israel, as you know. Some really horrible, terrible times, not only in Israel, but for Jews all over the world. You know, and I guess as an aside, as a parenthetical thing, I really do feel like I have to just mention the Jewish Insider report on Friday afternoon about Miguel Cardona, the education secretary. He had agreed to an urgent meeting with Jewish organizations about the galloping anti-Semitism on U.S. campuses. He agreed to the meeting. They said, you know, after October 7th, we met with you. We asked for a number of things to protect Jewish students. You've done none of the things that we asked you to do. I don't know what they were. I'm just citing what was written in the Jewish Insider report. You've done none of them. We need to have another urgent meeting with you. So he said, okay. The meeting was supposed to take place last Friday. 20 minutes before the meeting, his office informs the Jewish organizations of who is supposed to be participating. So together with the Jewish organizations that are trying to protect Jewish students, that, you know, and believe you me, I'm no big fan of the American Jewish establishment, but they're trying, belatedly albeit, to defend, to protect their children on university campuses. And they want to talk to the Department of Education about why it is, you know, to demand why it is that the civil rights of American Jewish students aren't being defended. So Cardona agrees to this meeting, but he tells them 20 minutes before the meeting is supposed to take place that he's decided to be inclusive. So with all of the Jewish groups, Hillel, ADL, the Federations of North America, the Louis Brandeis Center for Human Rights, and all of these other major groups that this is what they do, you know, for a living. They also invited anti-Zionist groups, ostensibly led by Jews, who are participating in the Hamas riots, the assaults against Jewish students on campuses. So there's like a new group that is a spin-off of If Not Now, one of the groups together with Jewish Voice for Peace, which is run by the Muslim Brotherhood, but whatever, that are active participants in this. So If Not Now has a new group that they put together, led by all the people from If Not Now, called something like the Diaspora Alliance. They have the Nexus Initiative. The Nexus definition of anti-Semitism says that anti-Zionism isn't a form of anti-Semitism. So you have these groups, Trua, Rabbis for Human Rights, which is another anti-Zionist organization of reform and conservative rabbis who hate Israel. So you have these 3 or 4 tiny organizations that don't represent the vast majority of American Jews, over 90% of American Jews who support Israel. And they are brought in by the Secretary of Education to this meeting to talk about anti-Semitism on campus with all of these major Jewish organizations. So a lot of them, the federations, the Louis Brandeis Initiative, the OU, the ADL, they pulled out of the meeting. They said, we're not sitting with them. We're not sitting with the pyromaniac to talk about how to put out a fire. No, siree, Bob. It's a total humiliation. It's bringing the capos in with the Jewish leaders, you know, to talk about the annihilation of the Jews. That's what it is. And so when the administration does things like this, and it's not the first thing that they've done or the last thing that they're going to do, what they're saying is we just don't care about the Jews. We don't care about them at all, like not even a little bit. And so you hear in Israel, they're guaranteeing Hamas's security. They're guaranteeing Iran. They're demonizing Israel. They're enabling the criminalization of the Jewish people, of our army, of our sons, of our state, and, you know, threatening to condemn us at the UN Security Council, green lighting purportedly these ICC investigations, which are complete kangaroo court, you know, turning reality on its head against our leaders. You know, so the one thing that's changed is the Israeli people. You know, opposition leader Yair Lapid, his career before he went into politics was he was a TV host. You know, he looks like a TV host or a car salesman, which I think he also did. He did banking commercials, but whatever. He was a celeb. So here, what did Yair Lapid have this shtick? He had all of it was shtick. It's still all shtick, whatever. But he had a shtick where he said, "What is Israeli to you? What's most Israeli to you?" And it would be things like falafel and, you know, the racquetball game that Israelis play on the beach and all kinds of things like that, right? And a lot of other things. And you want to know what? It's very clear is Israeli heroism. And I'm just going to give you, you know, I'll leave you with a couple of pictures in your head, right? the quintessentially Israeli thing, right, are our reserve soldiers and their families. It's young families. It's young moms with little kids, right, who drive their husbands to the base to be called up for battle where the entire international community is going to try to demonize him and his comrades and their commanders and the government of Israel, right, for carrying out a necessary battle required for our defense and survival, right? And she brings him there with their little kids in the back seat sleeping, okay? That's quintessentially Israeli. That's heroism. That's her heroism. That's his heroism. That's the heroism of families. And you have other heroism. You have the heroism of the bereaved parents of soldiers who have been killed in this war, who left home, who aren't even giving themselves the chance to grieve for their sons. And they went to Jerusalem, and they erected a tent across from the Prime Minister's office. And they've been there now for over a week, and they declared a hunger strike. They were going to go on a hunger strike until the army went into Rafah. And they said they're not going to leave without victory. Their demand is that their sons didn't die for nothing, that the government keep its commitment to defeat Hamas. That's what it means to be Israeli. What it means to be Israeli is to be the Prime Minister of Israel and stand up to the entire international community, because that's the job of the Prime Minister of Israel. There is no other job, because his job is to defend the people of Israel. It's to defend the Jewish people and to tell the people of the world, we'll stand alone if that's what we have to do. We've changed. Circumstances change. We're not powerless anymore, and we're not going to be powerless again. And, you know, I look at the United States and I look at the Biden administration's mistreatment of Israel, and I know that it doesn't reflect the position of most Americans, but I know it does reflect the position of the Biden administration and an awful lot of people in Congress, on this, particularly on the Democratic side. And Europe, whatever, we're used to that. Their genie's been out of the bottle at least since 2000. But I know I had a wonderful exchange with Colonel John Spencer this week about, he just put out another detailed report showing that Israel isn't breaking any laws, that nobody has ever fought the way that we fight, so morally, with such care for civilians. And he said, I stand with good, I stand with right, I stand with the people of Israel, you know? And like him, I know there are hundreds of millions of people. And, we don't feel lonely, but in this international community right now, we are alone. So I am so thankful that the Jews are not in the same circumstances we were in 80 years ago, and that we're an incredibly heroic people. And thankfully, we're led by Netanyahu right now, who's heroic in his leadership. And we'll go forward, and we'll fight, and we'll win against all odds. And we'll celebrate Independence Day after we mourn our dead on Memorial Day next week. And I will see you then. So take care and keep the faith and keep supporting us. Take care.